Good morning. Find my place here. Okay, so I'm Pastor Dale, and this morning we're going to talk about Jacob. Before we get into that, well, our sermon this morning is going to talk about a lot of conflict and control, transformation, and we probably are going to leave with more questions than we got answers to, but hopefully we'll gain some insight in how God works with us. So before we get started on the scripture, reading this made me think of some of the spiritual struggles that I had. And you've heard some of these stories before, but I was raised in a Baptist upbringing, Baptist family. Both sides of my family were Baptist, and especially prevalent in my nurture was my maternal grandmother. And every time we go visit her, she would always be worried about my salvation, right? And whenever I went to church with her, I'd be sitting in a pew and the pastor would have the altar call. You know, everybody had their heads bowed and the pastor would invite anybody to come up front that wanted to start or reaffirm a relationship with Christ, right? And me being 10 or 8 or 12, however old I was, my grandmother would sneak in the pew beside me and elbow me and said, "Dale, are you going up?" "No, I'm not going up," you know, and it was just a lot of stress for me to make this decision when I was so young. And so the other thing that she would do is she was big into Christ's second coming, and she would always be talking to me about the tribulation and the only thing is Christ's second coming. So here I am, a young kid, and did you know that maybe in the year 1997, in August, they're thinking late summer, Christ will be coming? What am I supposed to do with that? So anyway, it was kind of this space. When I wasn't visiting my grandmother, okay, I was home with my farm family, enjoying everything about life on the farm. During some of this time, we sold the farm and my family broke up. So I was always either enjoying that or looking for it. You know, I was working for my grandfather's farm. I was working for the neighbor's farm, but this was the real need and the real thing I was missing. Okay, and I go visit my grandmother. She talked about all stuff, and I was having trouble thinking that one was the same as the other. It was like two different things. And I didn't really understand how pursuing, not that I didn't believe everything I said, okay, but I didn't know what she wanted from me or what God wanted from me when I had all this other real world stuff to deal with, you know. So in my young mind, that was the conflict. So what I was doing was I was holding on to that I loved, and I wasn't sure that God and I were on the same wavelength. I was measuring my response and I was protecting myself. So today we're going to talk about Jacob, okay? And to learn about Jacob, we're going to review the story of Abraham, his grandfather. So in Genesis 12, we're introduced to Abraham as the family that God is going to use to redeem creation. Okay, and I have a lot of notes here, but basically, God talks to Abraham and makes promises like, "I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, and for the generation to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you." So the last time I preached on Abraham, being called to sacrifice Isaac and the angel of the Lord intervening. And then the story transitions to Isaac. Now, Isaac, there's not a lot said about Isaac. He has two sons, twin sons, Jacob, which we're going to focus on today, and Esau. So in case you're not familiar with Jacob and Esau, they were twins, and Esau was born first before Jacob, but Jacob grabbed the heel of Esau at childbirth. And so Jacob come to mean heel grabber. And as these two grew up, Esau was a hunter, and Jacob liked to stick around camp or around the home. And one day Esau came back from hunting, and Jacob had made the stew, and Esau says, "Man, I'm hungry. I could use some of that stew." And Jacob's like, "Give me your birthright, and I'll give you some stew." And Esau's like, "Yeah, whatever. You can have it. Give me some stew." So then later on, when it came time for Isaac to bless the oldest son, Esau, he said to Esau, he said, "Go out and hunt wild game and come back and make me a savory stew, and then I will give you my blessing." Well, Esau's mother heard this, and Esau's mother favored Jacob and said, "Jacob, go put animal skins on you so you're hairy like your brother, and I will make a meal like your dad likes, and you can go in and get his blessing." So that's what happened, and Jacob got the blessing that Esau was supposed to get. And Esau was very angry. And Esau hated Jacob and said, after the days of mourning, this is in Genesis 27, we're in now, after the days of mourning, I shall kill him, my brother. And the days of mourning just meaning that it's the last days of Isaac. And anyway, so Rebekah, hearing this, sends Jacob, the younger son, away so Esau, her brother, can cool down. So now Jacob, okay, deceiving his brother, deceiving his father, manipulating stuff, now because of his own actions, is fleeing to Laban, which is his mother's brother, which is Jacob's uncle. And he goes there also to find a wife. And he meets the wife, which is a daughter of Laban. And her name is Rachel, I believe. And he falls in love, right? And he works out a deal with Laban to work 7 years, and he can have Rachel as his wife. And so Jacob works the 7 years, and then at the wedding day, I guess the bride is covered up and stuff. He gets married, and sooner or later he figures out that this is not Rachel, this is Leah, the older sister. And he says to Laban, he says, what did you do to me? He says, this was not the deal. And Laban's like, well, we marry our oldest daughters off first. We can't pick and choose. We have to go in order. So, which I'm glad I started with the oldest daughter. So anyway, so Laban says, if you work for me one more week, I will give you Rachel. Yeah, if you work for me after the 1 week of the wedding ceremony with Leah or whatever, then I will give you Rachel for another 7 years. So that's what the deal was. Jacob got Rachel a week later, but he had to work 7 more years for it. And then somewhere he had to work 6 more years for some livestock or something. I don't know. So anyway, so Jacob is being deceived by a master deceiver, right? And I'm not sure Jacob is so innocent in this, but through this journey from his homeland to Laban, God meets him, right? And promises that he says, I am the Lord your God, your father of Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land you are lying, and your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. And I am with you and watch over you until my promise is complete. So here now Jacob is hearing from God directly. And Jacob responds, well, if you'll be with me and you'll watch over me, and you'll give me food to eat, and you'll give me clothes to wear, and I return safely to my father's home, then you can be Lord my God. So Jacob is kind of got his feet in both worlds, right? He's hearing God, but he's kind of hedging his bets. He's conditionally agreeing with God, but it's not perfect, right? So anyway, now that Jacob's been there 20 years and he has livestock, 2 wives now, and kids, grandkids, he starts manipulating the herd some. And I'm not clear whether it's his own animal husbandry skills that he made a deal with Laban that he would take, I don't know, the speckled sheep or something, and he had some system where he set up, birch limbs or something in front of the water troughs. Anyway, he got more of this one kind of sheep. And I don't know if that really works, which I doubt, or it was God intervening. But anyway, his herd multiplied and Laban's diminished. So anyway, Laban's not treating him the same anymore. Laban's, getting the worst end of the deal, and Laban's herdsmen are a little suspicious of Jacob, and it's getting uncomfortable. So God speaks to Jacob again and says, go back to your country and I'll make you prosper. So Jacob leaves and goes back to his country. So Jacob actually listened to God this time. And I think that's where we are today now in our scripture text, starting in Genesis 32:22. So Jacob now has Laban behind him and all the deception and all the uncomfortableness that's behind him. And he's heading back to his homeland, which is Esau, which is the brother that threatened to kill him 20 years ago. Okay. Jacob is wealthy. He's got 2 wives, kids. He's got livestock, right? And he's going to his brother and he doesn't know what to expect, right? The positive thing about Jacob's faith is he did what God said. But also, he doesn't really have much of a choice either. He's running from his consequences. So here Jacob is at the Jabbok. And the Jabbok is a river about, 30 feet wide or something that's crossable in the summertime easily, but in other times of the year, it's difficult. And when Jacob first came to Laban, he didn't have much more than a staff, right? But returning from Laban back to his father's land, right? He's got wives, kids, livestock. It's so many that he split them up into 2 companies. Before Jacob went to see Laban, he was relying on his own strategy, his own wits to get ahead. After 20 years, God has a little bit bigger piece of his mind and his focus. He's still far from perfect. But just the fact that Laban came back was obedience to God. So here we are at the Jabbok, right at the river. Behind him is Laban, in front of him is Esau. All this wealth that Jacob has acquired is not doing him any good, right? It's not helping him out. And he prays. He says, "O God of my father," this is Genesis 32, "O God of my father Abraham, my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you've shown your servant. I had only my stand across this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid that he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." So, have you ever come to this point in your life where you come up to this boundary, this barrier, this wall, and you think about everything you have, and you just kind of put it in front of you and just ask God to stand in and help you? Everything you have isn't exactly what you need. Or maybe you didn't deserve it. Or maybe you were so busy achieving and accomplishing that you're not really sure that what you have was God's blessing or not. You didn't know if it was the will of God. So back to my story of my faith development. I remember when we didn't have the farm and the family wasn't together anymore, really upset one night. And I was laying in bed and I was just talking to God, and I just realized that I have nothing to offer. Okay. Like I didn't have 2 wives and kids and a bunch of livestock, but what I had was this control that I could try to fix this, or this worry, or this thing that I thought I had to fix. Right. And I guess what I really did was that night is I sent it across the Jabbok in front of me, because I just, it wasn't helping me, and I just, so in our text continues then with a wrestling match with a stranger. So we don't know if this is a dream or a vision. We don't know who the stranger is. I read a lot of commentators, and the Jewish ones seem to think that this was a guardian angel of Esau, but the Christian ones seem to think it was either an angel of God or it was God. And when Jacob asks who the person is, the person responds, "Well, you need to know." But then later on in our text, Jacob claims that he saw God face to face. So the other thing we don't know about this wrestling match, what exactly it means, right? So it could mean wrestling for control. In Jacob's mind, is it the deceiver wrestling the obedient, child of God? Is it Jacob taking an approach to God? Usually Jacob's conniving and strategizing around the outside, trying to get his way, but now he's facing God head to head, right? And when you're wrestling with somebody, you're actually embracing them, right? You've got your arms around them, and it's more of a relationship. The other thing I wonder about this is this physical manifestations of personal prayer, right? 1 Thessalonians 5:17, pray without ceasing. Psalm 66:17, crying out. No fervor, another word that comes to mind. And then as I thought further about that this morning, I thought, well, you know what? This thing also reminds me of anxiety when I can't sleep at night. I'm tossing, I'm turning, and I'm fighting. And it seems to me that sometimes this anxiety or even a struggle in prayer is worse than the actual event that's coming. So moving on, God gives him the title of Israel. You have struggled with God, have overcome. So, this verse is probably the most troubling one for me, because I'm not of the mind that you can struggle with God and overcome. And God seems to be, or this stranger seems to be celebrating this. And I kind of thought we're supposed to submit to God, right? And we're supposed to be in unity with man. So as I try to filter this through my faith box, okay, which is pretty limited, could this be that Jacob overcame distrust, his lack of faith, and his selfishness? Jacob always struggled with his place among men and with God, and now he understands his place. He overcame. Could that be it? I guess maybe if we were in Jacob's shoes, we might better understand this. Israel was his new devout character. And it means God fights or struggles with God and man. So does this Israel indicate that Jacob's brokenness? Does this name Israel indicate that describe Jacob's brokenness and his journey back to his creator? So anyway, this was a hard one to iron out. And so I thought about how can we apply this to our lives, right? The Jabbok. Pay attention to the Jabboks in your life, the boundaries in front of you that you keep bumping into. For me, it was my grandmother pointing out my faith. She was telling me this is something to participate in, to live in, to experience. Or it might be a little more subtle, right? Now I got permission for this next one. I was in Florida last week, and I was thinking about the sermon, right? And visiting with my mother. And my mother writes reflections, these little one-page poems. I think we've read some over the years here during during worship time. But anyway, she was having a particular problem of her reflections called the river reflection. And I thought that was kind of odd at first because she's already wrote this years ago, right? But now she's having a problem with it. And it's too foreboding. And I told her to send it to me, and she didn't, and I couldn't, I have it anyway, but I couldn't find it. Anyway, it basically talks about the snowflakes falling out of the sky. It's a winter scene on the river, right? And that snowflakes, each unique and beautiful, falling out of the sky, and the icicles hanging and dripping, right? And they all end up in the river, and they melt, and they go away. And I kind of wonder, is this like the Jabbok for my mother right now? Is she equating God's creation and the creation of herself with, and wondering what that means as she gets older, you know? And so it was a good opportunity. I told her we can work on this together and finish writing this reflection and see what it does mean. So what does this wrestling mean to us? So once we settle in and decide to cross the Jabbok, right, we're going to get some new understandings. We're going to have to change the way we think or act or perceive. This might be an exhausting time. What you've held on to so tightly, you might have to let go. You might have to trust your river guide, right? And this wrestling will take place in many areas: your prayer life, your fellowship, your scriptural meditation, or maybe like Jacob in a vision or a dream. And coming out of the other side of this, you'll be something different. You are being continually transformed into the likeness of Christ, right? 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." So that is our change of name, right? That is Jacob becoming Israel. That is us becoming something different. And, we've had many change of names before in our life, right? Father, mother. What did that mean when all of a sudden you were called that? You quit thinking about yourself, and your perceptions change, and your priorities change, right? Wife, husband, ministry directors, pastor, driver. God, we don't getting close to 16, but maybe not quite. Graduate. Are these new names identifying our potential, how he designed us? What is your sanctified identity? If you're here this morning, you're working on it, right? So are you surprised by God's grace with Jacob? In my last sermon, I talked about God's character, right? God describes himself, Exodus 34, as compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loyal love, faithfulness. That seems pretty consistent with how he handled Jacob. My first reaction to Jacob is always as a judge, right? Jacob, open your eyes. You are hurting everyone around you and you just look silly. Be content where you are and have faith that God will take care of you, right? But as we dig into this, we see the character and the glory of God. The grace and patience he gives Jacob is also what he gives us. My reaction to this story, my judgmental reaction, shows me how short-sighted and broken I am. So some concluding thoughts from this text this morning. Jacob never had to fight. He was already a recipient of God's blessing through Abraham. Jacob spent his life racing to get a blessing that he already had. What are we busy doing, right? We have the promise of eternal life, but tend to invest in this way. We have the promise that God will profit us and not harm us, but we measure his instruction to us. God says that He will give us the desires of our heart, but we still yearn to acquire and dream and let go of dreams because do we really buy it? So one of the last conversations I had with my grandmother before she died was, not surprisingly, about faith. And she was talking about something, and I hadn't seen her for many years, and I had grown up quite a bit, right? And I argued with her the way I argue with you guys sometimes. And she's just, got quiet. And she looked at me and she says, well, you might be right. And she said, I think you're kind of sarcastic. And she said, I think that's okay. And she laughed. And to me, I felt like that was the end of a struggle. That was a lifelong wrestling match that I had won. And I didn't win against God, and I didn't win against my grandmother. I won being at peace of who I was and how I came about my faith and how I thought God was speaking to me. I recognized God's work in my life. This is God's story and my story, which looks different than Jacob's story and what looks different than your story. This story doesn't clean up right for us because there's too much we don't know. The stranger didn't tell Jacob his name. One commentator thought that giving Jacob a name was just giving something to control and use against him. It would just, to God would just be another tool in Jacob's pocket. Would filling in all the blanks for us cripple us in the same way? We're not in control. God is. So I think the mystery that Jacob had going through this is the mystery that's continuing on to us as we try to interpret it. So we're not in control. God is. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we ask that you help us identify the boundaries we're hitting. We offer thanks for your willingness to embrace us in the wrestling. And we are in awe of your commitment to transform us and how personal that is. In Jesus' name, amen.